So you did a 2 year look in on the Inflation Reduction Act. You also had a piece that referenced that was about a piece that Jonathan Chait wrote, comparing the the Biden presidency with the Obama presidency, and uh, and really in terms of like what Harris has apparently, or at least seemingly, done, which is to pick up this mantle. And let's just start with this notion. Uh, Chait was, as you recounted, to be honest, I didn't read his piece. But as you recounted, he said Biden sort of inexplicably picked up the mantle of the progressive left in the Democratic Party, and at least in the context of the economic policy, I want to make that clear to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Pursued a what I would say the most progressive economic policies of maybe since Johnson, and he was like it was inexplicable, and let's just take it from there because it was explicable. You made the point.
Yeah.
There were two very prominent reasons for that: Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. So, and just to be clear, Harold Meyerson wrote that piece.
I'm sorry. Okay,
for the Prospect, but yeah, I'm familiar with it, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, the whole psychology of this goes back to the fact that John Chait wrote a book. John Chait, my old University of Michigan pal, who we went there at the same time. Actually, I'm using the word pal very loosely.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book at the end of 2016 called Audacity, about how great the Obama era was. And they actually had to recall the book and change some of it because Trump won. So he had to recalibrate this entire book that was put out and released because the fact that it was not a lasting legacy, at least in the short term for Obama, was made clear by the fact that his handpicked successor lost the 2016 election. So everything to that point kind of is John Chait angry about the fact that he had to change his book, and making up for this fact that his side, the agenda that he prefers, which is keep anyone to the left of like Bill Clinton circa 1996 out of the decision-making portals of the Democratic Party, lost the ability to dictate terms in the Biden regime. And there, yes, as you say, there's a very good reason for this. Going all the way back to 2016, when Bernie Sanders won primaries and had millions and millions of people vote for him. In 2020, Sanders again won early primaries, almost won the nomination, and had millions and millions of people vote for him. And Joe Biden is a party man. Joe Biden was a neoliberal when neoliberalism was cool in the 1990s. And now, in the present day, he's in the center of where the Democratic Party is today. And what he did, instead of the classic positioning of you move to the left for the primary, you move to the center for the general, what he did is he did a unity task force to try to create a popular front against Trump in 2020. And it was successful. I mean, the part of this that nobody seems to figure out is that Joe Biden won the election based on building that unity coalition, building that unity task force, and then putting together an agenda that was really based on that, at least at the domestic level, once again, to stipulate. Joe Biden didn't really have a big policy apparatus during the 2020 presidential primary. He kind of had to go to Bernie's and the Elizabeth Warrens of the world just to have something to say. It's actually an inverse of what happened after the financial crisis. There's a famous line that Tim Geithner has said often, and the line is "plan beats no plan." So after the financial crisis, the only person who came forward initially with a plan to deal with the banks was the sort of neoliberal Geithner-Summers plan, and that beat no plan, which is what everybody else had. And this is the inverse of that. So Biden didn't really have a plan for governing other than let's beat Trump and bind the nation together, right? So the plans were in the hands of the Sanders Warren faction of the party, and the plan beat no plan. And Jonathan Chait is very upset about this, and he's trying to rewrite history essentially.
And we should say, like, what you're talking about is, I think, is fascinating. I mean, this is why when people talk about Project 2025, they get so nervous, because this is a huge plan that is there. They have not just a plan, but they also have a plan to execute the plan. They have the apparatus. They have like the personnel.
Right.
This rarely exists on the Democratic side. Project for American Progress existed like that for a while. I think maybe in
right.
maybe a little bit.
Well, you want to do the history? Let's do the history. Like, so the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, was after the loss of Mondale
Dukakis
in '84.
Right.
Dukakis was a DLC guy, right? So he was.
Was he?
Yes.
Are you thinking of Tsongas?
Dukakis was also kind of associated with that. The whole competence frame is a very DLC frame.
He was yes, a technocrat. That was his big.
He was a technocrat. So they built over 4 years. Al Fromm and all these guys built a policy apparatus and the talent, the people to actually put it together. And the DLC took over the party essentially when Clinton won in '92, and they kept a hold on it for a long period of time. And the Center for American Progress, which you just referenced, that was kind of a presidency in waiting.
Right.
It was kind of built that way. Project 2025 is kind of an offshoot of that way of thinking, that the way you do this is through, lining everything up in advance. And Elizabeth Warren's project for the last 12 years, her mantra is personnel as policy. And she has put people in place, whether from, alumni of what she has been doing, or just, talent that she's put together and endorsed, and got them into the government. Now, it's very funny that Third Way, which is the moderate faction of the Democratic Party, I believe it's Third Way, maybe it's not them, but they put something out this week called the Moderate Talent Pipeline, which it sounds like a bunch of mediocre people. like why did you name it the Moderate Talent Pipeline? Do I want someone with moderate talent to be in my government? But they recognize that what Elizabeth Warren did, and to a lesser extent what Bernie Sanders did, was very smart. You line up the people who are able to do the job in advance, and you do that in such a way that when everybody's scrambling and looking around for people to place in among the thousands of political appointees that are in every government, if you have the people there that are available, that's might be a place where you look. And so I think everybody's figured this out now, that this is kind of how you do it. You pregame the whole thing.
Okay, so with that said, Harris comes out with her policy. Give us like a to the extent that we know. I mean, it has been fascinating, because the reason why I bring up Chait is not just because I still remember the Iraq War, and I know that you do too, and others, but because he seems to be representative, or at least illustrative, of a huge pushback that's happening right now. Like the Washington Post editorial board came out, and said that Harris's policies are gimmicks. and Catherine Rampell, I think it is, from the Washington Post, also said, like, you're playing into Donald Trump's hands when he calls you a communist, which is, I mean, just beyond. And there's a lot of pushback, which is, it's fascinating because there's this quality of like, well, it's gimmicks, but it's also the wrong gimmicks. Like you need to do something that's serious, but we don't want you to do something like that's serious in that manner. Give us a sense of like what, talk about her proposals and what that is indicative of.
All right, there's a few things going on. So a week ago, I was actually in Las Vegas for the last of the Harris-Walz kind of barnstorming tour of battleground states. And there was one policy that was mentioned there. And that I would put actually in the category of gimmick. It was sort of a gift to the culinary union, which is very big in Las Vegas. It's the workers in the hotels. And she adopted Trump's policy of no taxes on tips, eliminating taxes for tips, which is, I think, a policy gimmick. It's also, I think, bad policy.
Right.
The idea that a retail worker making $40,000 a year and a restaurant server making $40,000 a year, one isn't taxed on those tips because of the way that they actually get the salary, and someone else is taxed on that salary because it's obtained in a different way. That seems like a bad policy idea. Also, even at that level, at the $40,000 level, most people at that level don't pay any federal tax. There's a large standard deduction. There's the earned income tax credit. There's just not, you're not going to do a lot for people who really need it if you eliminate taxes on tips, whereas high-end servers who don't maybe need the help as much are going to get this large tax break.
And how would that apply to Social Security tax?
Apparently it wouldn't. Like what the Harris campaign said is, in their incarnation, it would be only on the income tax, not on the payroll tax.
Okay.
So if it was on the payroll tax, it'd be even worse, because then you'd basically just be borrowing that money and
from
not
Social Security. Yeah.
Funding Social Security, but also, those servers would get nothing in retirement because they wouldn't have paid in at that level. So it would be really bad if it was payroll tax. As income tax, it's just a silly kind of gimmick. I think that the benefit you get for that in Nevada, where the culinary union is really powerful, you might lose in Pennsylvania with the 90% of people who don't get their pay through tips being mad that somebody who does is getting a tax break and they're not.
Right.
So
right.
I think it's a bad idea. And I'm worried that since next year, really the whole conversation will be around taxes. The fact that now both parties support this means it might have to go into the mix. And that means a relative loss of whatever revenue that you're going to potentially get if you, raise the corporate tax or eliminate some of the Trump tax cuts on the wealthy. All that money that was going to go towards something productive is now going to go towards this gimmick of eliminating tax on tips. So I don't love the idea. And I felt like it was kind of where the political people were really driving this policy. But then we fast forward.
Let me just add, I just want to say, because we have gone over this on the show, I just want to add, you haven't even addressed the construction of this policy on the Republican side. If you look at like the Ted Cruz bill that went out there, tips could be, I'm a podcast guy, and
Absolutely.
we don't have subscriptions. We call it tips. And
we call it tips.
Send me
exactly.
tip. And so that,
and the idea that Harris would put guardrails around that is very difficult. Anytime you have a part of the tax code that has a benefit, people are going to swim toward that part of the tax
and the wealthy
code.
people are going to be the ones who swim
and they know how to do it. They have the lawyers.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're going to figure it out.
So that even there's a two-part criticism. Okay, so but everything else.
Yeah, put that aside. So then we have this policy speech that's focused on the cost of living and bringing costs down. And in the interim, Harris, it leaks out that Harris is using Brian Deese, who was the head of the National Economic Council under Biden, Bharat Ramamurthy, who was the deputy to Deese, and also Elizabeth Warren, staffer and chief policy advisor. These people, Gene Sperling as well, he's a veteran of practically every administration in the last 30 years, but is very focused on the child tax credit over the last 5 years. All these people who, whether they were already there or they eventually drifted there, kind of followed the Biden trajectory, right? Of, okay, we're going to break with these policies of the past. We're going to focus on full employment. We're going to focus on industrial policy. We're going to focus on competition policy and aggressively enforcing antitrust. All these people suddenly are in orbit of Harris, mainly because they have the ideas. Once again, plan beats no plan, right? They're the ones who have been forming policy over the last 4 years. So we get to this North Carolina speech that Harris gives, and it's really focused in three buckets: healthcare, housing, and food, and which are the main drivers of, I think, worries about cost of living. You could throw education in there as well. They don't mention it in the speech, but those buckets are some of the biggest, right? So on housing, it's actually kind of interesting. You can see that there are two kind of competing ideas here. One is the sort of YIMBY idea that all we have to do is increase supply. There's another idea that's more focused on rent control, more focused on suppressing the ability of corporate landlords and algorithms to gouge people on prices of housing. She adopts both, essentially. She says, yeah, we're going to put money into a fund to try to increase supply. We're going to build 3 million new units, but also we're going to take the tax break away from Wall Street when they're acquiring homes and hoarding them for rent. We're going to crack down on algorithmic price fixing, like RealPage, you probably have covered in the past, which aggregates all of the information in a rental market and then encourages all of those landlords to raise prices. So she adopts kind of both of those, right? Then in terms of healthcare, it was mostly backwards looking. Earlier last week, we found out the 10 prices on prescription drugs that were negotiated through Medicare. Those prices are going to go down as much as 79% through that negotiation. It would be good if they were actually available now, but they won't be until 2026.
Right.
But you know, this is the beginning of every year we're going to get this announcement of more price drops for these prescription drugs within Medicare, and she wants to extend that to all payers, so people who aren't over 65 get the benefit of that and get the benefit of reducing, capping out-of-pocket expenses on prescription drugs, $35 a month insulin, things like that. And then we have food, and in this area, this is where the wonks have gone crazy. This is the area where the Catherine Rampels of the world have called it communist. They assume that what Harris was talking about was price controls on food. Essentially, they ran right to that conclusion. In reality, what she was calling for is not very different than what we already have on the books in about 37 states. And that is an anti-price gouging law. We don't have that at the federal level, but we have it in many states, including New York, including Texas, including Florida. And what it says is, in a time of economic stress or dislocation, a hurricane, a national emergency, you can't, as a pandemic, you can't, as a consumer or as a business, just jack up your prices. And we actually have an example of this in the pandemic. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, put out a report just a few weeks ago about what grocery businesses were doing during the pandemic. And what they were doing is they were forcing suppliers to sell to them first rather than independent stores. And that was increasing their market power, and it was leading to higher prices. It was leading to, independent stores not having any goods for sale, and also increasing prices there because they just had nothing available to people, and they had to make back their profit. So this is almost a direct response to that, what Harris is talking about. It's learning from the past. We saw what happened in the pandemic, and we don't want that to happen again. Now, she's kind of, just sort of leaving it out there that, yeah, maybe this would help us in the here and now. But the way that she talks about that is she talks about the concentrations of power in the food industry. So, whether it's meat packing, meat and chicken and beef and all those companies, there's a concentration at the top in those particular industries. There's a big merger that was announced last week, proposed merger between Mars and a company called Kellanova, which is actually all of Kellogg's snack products. So there's like 50 brands now that are going to be in this new conglomeration, and that's true across the space in food companies. Unilever, ConAgra, there's a whole bunch of food companies, not many, 10 maybe, that you go down the aisle and you think you have a lot of choices, and they're all one of those 10 companies, right? So breaking up those concentrations of power and trying to get more competition going in those sectors would also have the effect of depressing prices, even if it wasn't in a national emergency.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
The one question in the housing thing, one of the things that Biden had in his sort of Hail Mary period towards the end had offered had suggested a 5% sort of national rent control. Where does that exist now?
So it wasn't mentioned in the Friday speech. However, Kamala Harris has talked about that on the campaign trail and other speeches. So as far as as I can tell, that's still a live issue. And now let's be clear that all of these are proposals. They're campaign proposals. If we don't get 50 votes in the Senate, we're not going to get any of these things. And we should be clear about that. But
I want to go because there's a meta question about that in a second that I want to get to. But yeah, with that caveat in mind, moving to the prescription drugs, that 79% reduction in those 10 Medicare drugs, the Biden administration's had to provide like subsidies to the insurance companies because they're so reliant, it seems to me, on those expenses. Explain that for me briefly.
Yeah.
But also
specifically, yeah.
I do know that she also mentioned the middlemen. One of your bailiwicks, the prescription benefit management companies, who are also now the insurance companies.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so let's take those two in kind. So first, the situation with insurance companies is really about the out-of-pocket cap. So if you think about this, if you have an out-of-pocket cap on all your prescription drugs, this year for seniors it's $3,000 a year. Next year it goes down to $2,000 a year. The rest of that money, so if you're above that cap in terms of what you're paying and what you should be liable for out of pocket, the insurance company has to pay that, right? So the insurance companies are saying, well, hey, you put a cap here and now we got to pay the rest of it. Keep in mind, this is Medicare Part D, which are all private plans. Right. There is no public Medicare Part D. The prescription drug benefit in Medicare, which was passed by George W. Bush, was an entirely private system. So these private Part D plans are saying, well, now we're going to have to bear the burden of these catastrophic, prescription drug costs that go above the cap. And so we're going to increase prescription drug prices for premiums, or for the Part D premium. We're going to increase the premium. And what the Biden administration said, okay, as a demonstration project, we will subsidize you for 3 years. They can do that under the Medicare laws. We're going to subsidize you so you can't increase the price that much. So it's a cat and mouse game that's going on there. The real answer, of course, is to fold everything back into traditional Medicare so they can spread the costs, right? So instead of, because these are Part D plans, they just do prescription drugs. So if you increase the cost of prescription drugs, they have nowhere else to go to make profit, right? They have nowhere else to go to cover it. If it's all within Medicare, they can reduce utilization here. They can, not pay for as expensive treatments. I mean, people don't like this, but there are also ways to reduce admissions.
It's
to
the efficiency
do it through
that
preventative care,
payer,
the efficiency,
that a
all of
single
that
payer
stuff.
that exists when you in terms of like volume.
So that's kind of the dynamic there. Now, talking about PBMs, yes, I was very pleased to see in the Friday speech, Kamala Harris talk about pharmacy benefit managers, which are these middlemen that sit in between health plans and drug companies and pharmacies. And they're the only ones that know what anybody is paying for what. So it's very easy for them to skim off the top. They are supposed to negotiate rebates with drug companies and pass those savings on. But they realize that the higher the list price, the higher the rebate they can get. And they keep a lot of those rebates. And so this actually has the effect of pushing prices up rather than bringing prices down. There is a great bill, bipartisan bill, by the way, in Congress that may well get a vote by the end of the year. And it would be good for Harris to actually endorse that bill. Jake Auchincloss, who's from Massachusetts, is the co-sponsor on the Democratic side. Not sure I remember who the co-sponsor on the Republican side is, but it would increase transparency. It would crack down. It would say all rebates have to go to the individual and to the health plan. It would crack down on the kinds of things where they steer drug plans to, or steer patients to get their drugs through mail order pharmacies rather than independent pharmacies. They run the mail order pharmacies, the PBMs. So, of course, they're steering people towards that option. And yes, as you say,
constant calls from CVS. They're my
right.
PBM care, whatever and I cannot tell you. I hear from them more than I do my kids about signing up for their.
And CVS, just to your point, CVS bought Aetna a few years back. And so they're with a large health insurance company. The other two big PBMs and the top three control about 85% of all drug transactions. Express Scripts is part of Cigna, and Optum Rx is part of United Health. So now when you're talking about PBMs, you're really talking about the insurance companies. And the insurance companies have managed this game so that they know more about drug transactions than anybody else in the system. And they can extract from all of those other players for their own benefit. And so Congress catching on to that. I'm glad to see Harris, aware of it as well.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.